Welcome to the Real Life Buyer podcast. In this podcast, you will hear interviews with business owners, entrepreneurs, thought leaders, authors, and technical specialists in their field. These professionals will hasten your development, accelerate your career, and broaden your business know-how. Now, introducing your host, Dave Barr, interviewing with a purchasing twist.
Hello, and welcome to the Real Life Buyer. Even though there has been an abundance of jobs waiting to be filled recently, have you had difficulty in finding the right position in the right company for yourself? If someone was able to hold your hand and help you to produce a standout CV that ignites interest in you, wouldn't you want their help? In this week's episode, I'm delighted to welcome Fatemah Mirza of Career Tuners. Fatemah has been on the team since 2010 and has helped many people achieve the careers of their dreams. In this episode, we'll discuss career development, chat about some of the worst interview mistakes and how to avoid them, and setting yourself up for future success. So, without further ado, I welcome Fatemah onto the podcast. Hi, Fatemah.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Been very much looking forward to this episode. Let's open up with a sort of conversation by hearing what career tuners are, perhaps what their specialities and expertise is, and your role within this organization.
Absolutely. So I lead a small team of resume writers and career coaches. And what we do is we help people find and achieve jobs that they feel more satisfied in and that pay them better. Sometimes this means, changing from one field to another. Sometimes it means going for a promotion. Sometimes it means settling for a role that's a little less challenging. So we help people that are in that transition space talk about their strengths in their resumes, on LinkedIn, and the cover letter, and the interview process. We also help them negotiate for more, and we provide leadership coaching to help them master any new challenges that they might face in their new role. Or if they're already settled into a role, but they're just feeling like creatively a little burnt out, they're not able to kind of hit their goals, we also provide leadership coaching for that as well.
Okay, so you've got quite an age range, would you say, of people coming in, or does it tend to be perhaps the older generation who are seeking that extra bit of support? What's the norm, so to speak?
I would say it's generally people that are in their 30s and 40s. We definitely have some people that are a little older than that who are looking to transition to an even higher place, like executive level, or that are looking for like their retirement jobs. But that tends to be a little less common. It's generally people who are looking to make $120,000 at least per year, but our median tends to be around 160.
Okay. Would you say there's an opportunity being missed, therefore, for those people that are a little bit younger, have less experience to really sell themselves and learn how to do things?
I think when you're younger, there is it's a lot more worth really to learn how to sell yourself, because if you start off really young with a really high salary, with a really good job, it's so much easier to transition to an even higher salary versus when you start off with a really low paid job. Even mentally, that can be so making the connection between what you're currently making to a job that pays double, even if that seems reasonable, it's a little bit harder to achieve. So I think it's actually even more important if you're younger to really achieve a good job, find a mentor that can support you with that, who can look over your materials and point you in the right direction.
Yeah, I thought that'd be the case, set off on the right, footpath, then that would help. Okay. Some people perhaps are lucky. Maybe I'll say they're lucky and they seem to be in the right place at the right time and have some great career opportunities that kind of fall into their laps. For the majority of us, however, many are stuck in an employment that may not inspire them. You alluded to that a little bit earlier on. So are there particular steps and guidance that you would give to people seeking to plan and prepare their careers in a way that brings better results?
Yeah, and I like what you said about being at the right place in the right time. You're maximizing your chances of being in the right place at the right time if you're going to more places, more times, right? So if you're interfacing with more teams, if you are, rather than having your lunch at your desk every day, you're talking to a new coworker every day, or you're staying in touch with your old coworkers from your last job, seeing what projects they're working on. This helps kind of manufacture the serendipity it takes for you to for that project to kind of fall into your lap. You'll hear about more opportunities. You'll hear about, innovations happening in your space that you can potentially draw inspiration from. So that's one step I really recommend. It's challenging and it's time consuming. However, if you make it fun and you try to look forward to it and think about the bright side of what you're going to be doing, hey, I'm going to talk to this fun new person and it's, I'm going to learn something interesting, kind of mentally reframing it like that can help you find that motivation. Otherwise, if you're doing all that and you just still don't feel satisfied in your role, the first thing that I would recommend, there's this free test online. It's called a High Five Strengths Assessment Test. It's pretty short. It has a very short little result that I really like. It tells you what your top 5 strengths are, and it could tell you things like, hey, you're a problem solver, or you're a timekeeper, like you make sure you're hitting deadlines, or you're a coach. And if you see strengths on that high 5 and you're like, hey, I'm not doing this at my job, like I don't have a deadline type job, it's just one long project, or I'm not having the opportunity to coach people and I have this as my strength, then you now know that your next job description has to have that in order for you to feel satisfied. That's one very quick and easy way to kind of go about it. And if you do that and you're like, I can't really think of a job that I would feel fulfilled at with these 5 strengths, it's probably advisable to reach out to somebody who has more experience in your space, who can take stock of what your strengths are and point you in some good directions.
Interesting what you said initially. That's quite a good point. So really both cultivating and developing, enhancing relationships and your network is something that you should actively pursue then. Is that something you feel is as important or maybe even more important than a good CV? Do people get more jobs through word of mouth perhaps and networks than they may see being advertised?
I would definitely say networking is more important than having a good CV, because sometimes you are going to need a CV when you're networking, but if your reputation precedes you, then you can have a very basic one that doesn't really sell you. I believe in the United States, the Bureau of Labor Statistics says that around 80% of jobs are filled via referral. You're still going to need a resume for liability reasons and, to be all kosher with HR, but aiming for those 20% of jobs, it's a lot harder than going for the ones that aren't being advertised, that are being filled internally. This statistic can be a little bit, some of those jobs are like internal moves and all of that. So it doesn't account for that, but internal moves can still really help you grow in your career.
Yeah. Now, when I was a lad, so to speak, people tended to have jobs, almost jobs for life. They were with a company for 10, 20, 30 more years. I know people right now that are in their 50th and more years service for the same company. But when I reflect and look at the younger people now and going into the jobs market, I tend to see a little bit more transition, people moving from job to job. From your experience, do you see the same kind of model? Do you see the dynamics of employment changing dramatically such that it's almost the norm now to change job? It's an expectation to change job, perhaps every 3 to 5 years. What do you feel is the standard nowadays?
Yeah, I feel like spending 5 years at a company is really good because it shows that you're loyal and hardworking. You're not going to just leave after 1 year. But anything beyond 8 years, and I feel like you're almost looked at as your experience is a bit stale. Oh, you're too set in the ways that this company is running. I'm not sure you can, fit within the culture that we've developed here or within the job description that we've developed here. So there's that bias that people run into now. And I've seen that happening quite often when people tell me, hey, this is what I heard in an interview. In those cases, if that's what you're going to job interviews with, you have like a long track record somewhere, it's really critical to show that you have agility, that you're able to adapt to new situations rapidly. So showing that you were maybe moved to a new team internally, or that you were working with a client with a dramatically different culture, that can really help show the interviewer that while you have been at one place for a really long time, you still have the agility and the flexibility required to adapt to a new place rapidly.
Yeah, I thought that would be the case. It's quite interesting to see things. And certainly from country to country, I see this as well.
Yeah.
There's a number of people I do know in the States where I see it's very common for people to move job almost every second year. I've worked with a number of suppliers where my contact seems to change on a very regular basis. And then you've got to re-establish rapport and obviously the knowledge of the history. So there's me with all this knowledge about what's happened in the past and why to do or not do things, whereas a new person comes on and it's, oh dear, I've got to reset and start again. So I think there are, as you say, benefits, but also some challenges with a frequently moving
Definitely
workforce, shall we say. Yeah.
I see this a lot with I network a lot with recruiters, and their email address will keep changing because they're changing from one company to another, and I can see how that would be really frustrating. But I think if you have that relationship even in the supply world with that one person, even if they move to a new organization, you can still leverage that relationship perhaps in a different way. But yeah, if you have that one process that you need, properly set, I can see how that would be very frustrating.
Yeah. Now, I've been looking at the Career Trainers website. Obviously, I like to read reviews to see what people think about yourself and such. And there does appear to be an art in writing a CV. Perhaps in a way that makes prospective employers take notice more than perhaps the old-fashioned way. I was brought up, as I said, with a very strict way of drafting a CV, which appears to be now, past its sell-by date, shall we say. So can you share some of your insights and recommendations that help to create a CV that really suits today's environment?
Absolutely. So everything is very digital. It's very, very unlikely that you're going to email your resume to somebody and that it's not going to end up in some sort of system where you're being automatically compared to other candidates. They're just like with purchasers, you guys have an ERP. HR people have something, have tools to organize people that they're potentially considering for jobs. They use an applicant tracking system, or they may use some kind of contact management system that has some kind of applicant tracking capability built in that helps you not have to read through each and every line to compare two candidates, right? So the number one rule to writing a good resume is to make sure the content, the writing is what's shining through and not the design. Because if your design's really fancy and you're trying to get their attention with color and stuff like that. I mean, we're not peacocks, we're people, right? So you have to focus on the content. And that means talking about what you achieved, what you made better in the supply world. Did you make any processes faster? Were you able to secure any discounts? Were you able to shortcut processes by, skipping middlemen? Or were you able to set up a middle party system where you guys were benefiting in some way? How did you improve vendor relations? All of these kinds of stories really need to be shining through on your resume. And when I say story, that's not typically what we think of when we think about a resume, but each bullet should be telling a story. This was the issue and I fixed it, or this was the opportunity and I capitalized on it, because we're programmed to really get attached and drawn into that kind of language. So if that's the kind of stories that your resume is telling, people will be reading with a lot more care rather than just skimming, okay, what was the job title? All right, kind of giving it that 6-second glance as people do. So that's, the number one rule is focus on the content and not the design.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because obviously people who've had, or perhaps have been around for longer than others, they would have encountered more experiences and perhaps be able to create more stories. Whereas obviously younger people may struggle with that side. When I was encouraged as a young lad to write my CV for my first few jobs, it was very, perhaps a bit boring. This is what my job title is. These are the activities that I'm employed to do. So writing stories was completely alien then. So, but now it's very different. And some people have said to me, you almost have to make sure that, particularly on your LinkedIn profile, and probably now from what you said, your CV, is that recruiters and the software will be looking for keywords, almost like an SEO search being undertaken.
Exactly.
And if those keywords are not in your CV or your LinkedIn profile, you'll basically be skipped over, whether you know all that stuff or not. Is that right?
Yeah, that is right. And the most, the biggest keyword that people are looking for is job titles. So if you're a young professional and you don't have that job title, and I'm looking for supply chain manager or purchaser or procurement specialist, and you don't have that job title, you're going to be under everyone else. So that can be very challenging. However, you can manufacture that experience for your LinkedIn by taking your school projects and putting as your job title let's say procurement specialist projects at university, blah, blah, blah. And then you can talk about your stories through your projects, through your volunteer work, through your leadership activities at school. Things are definitely different now. They're very competitive. Students are expected to be very well-rounded. So I'm sure all of you either have a paid experience, you were putting yourself through school by also working on the side, or you had the luxury of not working and you were doing some projects or some extracurricular activities. All of these are really phenomenal stories. And if you feel like, what I've done is totally unrelated to what I'd like to do, like maybe your job was that you were a valet parking assistant while you were putting yourself in school, well, talk about some of the transferable skills. Talk about how many hours you worked per week, because that shows an employer that, hey, you were going to school for 40 hours per week, and then you were spending 20 hours per week at this job. That's extremely impressive. It shows a lot of work ethic. Show that you were responsible for handling large amounts of cash, that you're trustworthy, that you're dependable. Not saying those words exactly, but showing them by talking about some of the things that you were trusted to do. Think about, how is it that somebody could really mess this job up? And how did I not do that? And that'll help you tell an interesting story.
Cool. So if you had somebody approach you now, just pick any age you like, just as a for instance, what kind of things would those clients need to bring to you? What sort of things should they prepare? What information should they have? What format should it be in, etc.? How do you work your way through their history, so to speak, and turn it into something that is perhaps a showcase?
Oh, are you talking about while working with my team? If so, nothing. We will do all of that for you. All you have to do is talk to us on the phone.
Also, it's conversation, because I'm also thinking that you have to prepare that you've created perhaps your own version of a CV, and you have to have all this stuff listed down, and then you kind of hand it over, and you guys use your wizardry to recreate it in the wording and the style that, would make an impact. But it's just a conversation then.
Yeah, it's just a conversation, but there are people who think better that way. I mean, I know I do. Like, if I'm expected to tell a story, I always have this nagging fear at the back of my head that I'm forgetting something. I feel like if I write some notes, it's a lot easier for me to feel confident that what I'm presenting is the full truth. And a lot of people are like that too, but a lot of people just prefer conversation. So our service model, it's based on whatever you need. If you want to share notes, we'll go over them with you. Or if you want to just have a conversation, we'll do that as well. If we have a conversation and you think of something later, we'll add that in. It's that kind of thing, because this resume, it's just 2 pages, and you're supposed to boil down your entire person into that. And people are so different. How they work is different. How they communicate is different. Your stories are different. So our process is designed to take all of those differences and empower you through that and make sure that your story is really you.
Right. So would I be right in thinking that you have prepared a series of questions that help to tease out of people the kind of things you want to know that they may not consider, sharing at this sort of conversation?
Yeah. We get that a lot. We get a lot of our clients being like, "Oh, that's a really great question," or this is I probably shouldn't be saying this, but some of our clients are like, "Wow, I need to take the rest of the day off because that was like a very intense conversation." We went through like everything I've ever done, because that is, you are putting your entire self, your entire history, and it can be very exhausting. But, to your original question, it's whatever you make of it, if you give us your stories, we can tell them, and you'll have a resume that you're proud of.
Right. And do you have on your website something that helps people to give them a vision of the kind of things that need to be emphasized when you write or, develop a CV?
Yeah, if you go to my website, if you go to careertuners.com/podcast, you can actually grab what I like to call my offer doubling resume cheat sheet. It's a resume that I've annotated, and the resume that I'm using is kind of it's piecemeal. I've put it together with different clients to kind of show you guys the complete picture, whether you're just starting out in the field or you're a senior executive, what your resume should look like. But one of the pages that I've used in that resume is of a client that was able to double the original offer that they received from $80,000 per year to $160,000 per year.
Wow.
So you guys can take a look at that and see how they achieved that. But the main thing the main resource for you when developing your resume really is the job descriptions you're looking for. Every time you read a job description, just kind of like look at the bullets. Every time you think, oh yeah, I've done that, or I've done something similar to that, there you go. That's a story. Just jot it down in your resume. And one big piece of advice I'd like to share with everyone today is when you're writing your resume, you always have in the back of your mind, okay, this is what the final picture is going to look like. Please do not do that, because the creative part of you that's trying to just write uninhibited and the editing part of you that's worried about the final picture, they can't really work together. You have to write first and then let your editor come in and shorten things up and tighten things and polish everything up. But if you are looking at your resume, you're trying to write your resume and you're just having a hard time and you're like, nothing is really coming to me, everything sounds stupid, it's because you are letting your two parts of your brain clash, and you should just let yourself write and then edit it later.
Yeah, that's good advice. And sometimes, as you say, it helps for other people who have experienced like yourselves, that you'll know from experience what works and what doesn't work, what flows and what doesn't flow. And
Yes.
you can, as you say, overanalyze your own work until you make it really into perhaps a bit of a mess, because you start off so well and then you've sliced and diced so many times. And,
Yeah.
it's a bit bitty. It's interesting today. I'm not sure if you heard, but there are a number of demonstrations happening right at this moment in France about people who are being, perhaps the government is looking to extend people's retirement age. Okay. And it's always going to be something that's quite emotional. And it got me thinking on the way home today that people's working lives are now really getting stretched. There's a lady who was being interviewed who actually said her father was in his 70s and he's still working. He can't consider not working. And he was from the US. Now, this is quite a shift at the moment. People are now working into the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And sometimes they have no choice but to keep working because of the financial situation. For those people that really would be considered the end of their career, but can't finish working, what's the difference in how they perhaps structure or design their resume that makes it suitable for new jobs, that they're forced to go back out into the working environment? They can't afford to retire. Is there something fundamentally different about the elderly population as opposed to the younger generation, other than just experience they're drawing upon?
Yeah, and that's just so heartbreaking. And it is very common. It's happening in my own family as well. My father-in-law is in his 80s and he's still working as a lecturer. My dad just pushed his retirement age because they're worried about health insurance here. My mom's going back for a master's degree so she can have a better job with health insurance so my dad can hopefully retire. There is no rest in sight. I know things are really bad worldwide, but the healthcare situation here, I have a friend of mine who has paranoid schizophrenia, and if she wasn't getting her medicine from insurance, it would be costing her $350 a month. If you're unemployed and if you don't have $350 a month and you're having paranoid schizophrenia, it's very likely you're going to end up on the street, and there's going to be a homeless, crisis because of that. So this is like a very political topic, but one I feel very strongly about. I do think there should be dignity in the work that you're doing. You should be able to retire in a dignified manner. You should have the resources to be able to support you no matter where life takes you. But sadly, that is not the case in today's world, especially in the States. You do have to work until you die in a lot of cases. And some of the clients that we've worked with that wanted to take on kind of those retirement jobs, they're extremely skilled and very senior executives who want to have a retirement job. Like it's a more chill, more relaxing kind of thing where they're just lending part of their experience. The problem is when you are that old, when you are that qualified, you are going to come across as very intimidating and frankly outdated. And this is very harsh, but this is the reality of the world we live in. So there are a couple steps that you have to take in order to overcome those biases. Now, first and foremost, ageism is completely illegal in the United States. With that being said, it is still the most common form of discrimination. You're still going to be seen as too young or too old or whatever. And it's very hard to have a case to really, and when you're at that point of your life, I'm sure litigation isn't something that, you're too keen on. So what the two things that you want to do to de-age your resume and to overcome that bias is first only speak to what their hiring needs are. So earlier I mentioned my father-in-law, he's a lecturer in university in his 80s. And he has a lot of experience in the business space and in trading and all of that. However, he's lecturing in Arabic. He's an Arabic lecturer. So he should not talk about all of his business experience and all of his, trading experience. He should only talk about where he learned Arabic, how much he's taught, how he engages students, and that kind of thing. So you want to heavily filter the content in your resume. If possible, only go back 15 years. And then the second tip that I have to de-age yourself on your resume, and I really like this, a lot of people that I work with, they're like, look, I know I'm 70, but I feel 50. Like I'm really active, I'm really healthy. And usually these people are doing something to keep themselves physically fit. I had a gentleman who was in his 60s and we were working on his resume, and he was a triathlon athlete. So we put that in his resume. It shows that you are very vibrant and full of energy, and that can really help de-age your resume. Well, I have a third tip actually. When you go past a certain age, you may run into the unfair bias that you're not very technologically savvy, that you are going to require a lot of handholding from someone younger and that sort of thing. So to alleviate that bias, you can add content to your resume to show that you're on the cutting edge. If you've rolled out let's say an ERP implementation, I feel like that makes you look really technically savvy. You can put that on your resume. You can feature that in your summary, ERP implementation expert or something like that. If you rolled out a new procurement software that makes purchasing faster, that makes comparing like discounts and stuff faster, feature that in your resume in some way. Show that you, even if it's a little older, putting it in your summary can help lift that experience up a little bit visually, and it can draw some attention to it, and it can help you overcome that bias.
Brilliant. Thanks for sharing those tips there. Now, moving on, let's say you've got the best CV in the universe. You've now got loads of jobs lined up for interview. That's the scary time. You've got to go in, obviously present yourself. Now, it can't just be on a piece of paper. So how do you suggest people prepare for their meetings and develop their confidence, perhaps presence and behaviors to really wow their potential employers?
I think it depends on the kind of interview. You have, very technical interviews where you're asked to do exercises and stuff. You have interviews where you're asked to present case studies. You have things like simple screenings where they're just verifying who you are and whether you have the requisite experience. And then you have behavioral interviews, which are the most common. How would you do this? Or tell me about a time that this happened. I think if you are, capable of doing the job, the technical interviews and the case studies should pretty much be a breeze. It's just you doing your work, but in a different environment. However, behavioral interviews can be quite challenging, especially if you feel like you're bad at selling yourself and you're not very articulate. So it's just really important to get honest feedback from somebody that you can trust, who can be very critical, because I think a lot of us get so lost in our day-to-day that we sometimes lose sight of how we're coming across. We might be really passionate about our work. Like I recently coached someone for interviews who came across as, he was so passionate. He was so attached to the work that he was doing, to the point that he came across as almost difficult to work with. Like, oh my God, this guy is going to butt heads with me. And he was like, no, I sound passionate. Like I sound like I really care about my work. And I'm like, no, you sound like an A word.
Oh dear.
So you need someone who can call you out when you do that. Or, an interviewer's never going to tell you, hey, I'm scared to put you in front of people because you talk too much. You don't listen enough, right? They'll say something like, if asked for feedback, the most you're going to get is, we didn't feel like you had the right cultural values, which, what does that actually mean, right? So it's just so important to get candid feedback. And if you cannot get candid feedback for some reason, I would encourage you to interview for jobs that you don't really care about, because this gives you some free practice. It allows you to see the kinds of questions people are asking. It allows you to not be so emotionally attached, because when you really want the job, you tend to get nervous and you tend to underperform. So if you kind of warm yourself up to that world by, doing a few interviews at jobs that, whatever, like you get it, you don't get it, it's a great way for you to see what's out there. And I recommend doing this even if you're not looking for work, even if you're happily employed, because it helps you stay sharp.
Yeah. Are there any particular locations, websites, whatever, that can help you to practice and train? Is there anything in the AI world these days that enables you to do a pretend CV?
Oh, yes. Yes. I actually just created a ChatGPT script for putting together your resume cover letter in LinkedIn. If you feel like I'm pretty articulate, I can tell my stories. I just need it to be condensed and neatened into a resume. I don't really need to talk through my experiences. Just Google ChatGPT career tuners. When you purchase that script, there's a portion in that script that shows you how to generate really good interview questions from a job description. But you know what? You guys don't have to purchase it. I'll tell you. Let me look up the script really quick. But what you basically have to do is you have to go to ChatGPT and ChatGPT. Where is it? ChatGPT script. Let me find it in my computer right now. What you have to do is you take your job description and you put it into ChatGPT and you say, hey, can you please extract this into keywords? And once it does that, you need to ask it, can you please, what kinds of questions would you ask a person applying for the previously shared jobs? Or what kinds of, let's say, procurement-based questions would you ask the person applying for the previously shared jobs? And we did this, and every time we really loved the questions. They tended to be a little bit more technical in nature. For example, we did one where we posted a VP of marketing, and it's very like marketing. Like it's like, okay, can you describe your experience developing and executing marketing strategies that support corporate objectives? Like it doesn't really do the behavioral aspect of it. Like it doesn't ask you, hey, what would you do if two of your colleagues had conflicting ideas? How would you mediate? Or tell me about the biggest failure of a project that you ever led. Like it doesn't ask those kinds of questions. But if you are interested in transitioning to a new space and you're like, yeah, I can talk about my experiences really well, but I just don't know how to contextualize it to this new experience, this ChatGPT tool, I really love it. It's really phenomenal. Then all you need to do is get someone to give you feedback on your answers. So that should be easy. If you have friends who are in the field, they can look over your answers. They can coach you on what to say and do and stuff like that.
Brilliant. If you could perhaps, just for the listeners who want to click a link, perhaps is a way you can send me something and I can put that up on the show notes for people.
Absolutely. I will share my experiments with ChatGPT, what I did to get it to create a resume, because we found that ChatGPT, it's, a lot of the information that's fed to it is outdated, and sometimes the advice it can give is even damaging, right? What we see now, and, it's very common for people to take time off to raise their kids, if they have a death in the family and they need to manage their assets, for health issues and stuff like that. And, I asked ChatGPT, like, well, how would I talk about this in my resume? And it gave me like really bad advice. It was like, yeah, you want to talk about it in your cover. No, you don't want to talk about like how you're a cancer survivor in your cover letter, because unfortunately, this is, again, illegal. You're not supposed to be biased against someone who has health issues, but it's still there.
Yeah.
The bias that people have is, okay, is this person who has a history of mental health issues, are they going to have another breakdown? Is this job going to be too much for them? Is their cancer going to come back? This is really horrible way to think, but it's the reality. And if you talk about it in your cover letter, when you're just a piece of paper, when you're not even a person, right? That's like, it's really profoundly bad advice. There was a lot of other bad advice that it gives, but on the blog that I wrote where I talk about my experiments, I kind of logged those mistakes and those damaging pieces of advice, and I gave you links to my blogs on what to do instead. So if you are interested in using ChatGPT to put your resume together, please check that out. Simply Googling ChatGPT career tuners will get you to that blog, and I'll also send you the link after the call.
Fantastic. That sounds great. Thank you for sharing that. I'm really pleased I asked that question now. I alluded to in the introduction, you've just mentioned the keyword there, mistakes. Mm-hmm. So what should be avoided? And by definition, what should be seen to be a positive action and a behavior. So what would you draw out as the worst mistakes and the best things to do in these interview situations?
Well, I think by far, like the absolute worst mistake you can make in a resume is saying anything negative about your colleagues or your current workplace. I wasn't successful because my boss was refusing to fund my project. Like that's an absolute no-no. To you, it might sound like, hey, I'm giving a really valid reason for why this project wasn't seen to its completion. But to the interviewer, they're not going to relate to you. They're going to relate to your boss. They are on the other side of the table, just like your boss was. So that's the absolute biggest mistake that I see a lot of people making. They they come across as difficult to work with. They come across as difficult employees, even though they're not. And unfortunately, there just are a lot of bad bosses out there. And that is a very valid reason for someone not being successful in their workplace. But there are ways to talk about that and to talk about some of the things that you were able to achieve anyway. For example, if you have the kind of experience where you weren't able to achieve anything because your boss was like a micromanager, you didn't have funding, everything had to go through lots of bureaucracy, blah, blah, blah. You can still say in your resume, I ideated this, or it's a work in progress. You can still tell that story, because the key thing that the employer is looking for is Dave able to solve this problem? Is Dave able to capitalize on this opportunity? Does Dave have the requisite skills to do this job well, right? So as long as you can show that you were ideating or moving towards that, that's all the information they need in the resume. If they're asking why the project wasn't completed or why you haven't started it, you can say something like, we had a more pressing priority. We had to shift gears to doing X, Y, and Z, whatever it was. So please do not speak ill of your current workplace, your boss, your colleagues, anything like that. It's just really an immediate red flag for any employer.
Brilliant. That's really good. And for some really positive things to do, what should people actively consider making sure they do in the sort of interview situations, should we say? Is that, the way they present themselves, the way they turn up, the way they speak, what sort of things stand out in your experience?
So the language that you're using has to match the language that the interviewer would use. If you are making a transition to a new space, for example, you're going to be tempted to use language that's familiar to you, and that's immediately going to cause someone to pigeonhole you. For example, if I was trying to hire someone who was in procurement, and let's say they had a background in supply chain analysis, right? So if they're mostly talking about supply chain analysis and not enough about procurement, I would be like, well, you probably have the right skills, but you're clearly like a supply chain analyst. You're not a procurement specialist. So you have to make sure that all of the answers that you are sharing are tied in closely to the job that you'd like to do. If, for example, you have a project that didn't go well, you can talk about the procurement aspects of it and then tie, when we talk about a project that doesn't go well, you usually want to end with, and this is what I'm going to do to make such projects smoother in the future. Talk about procurement technologies or talk about procurement processes that you're going to implement to make such projects smoother in the future. Something like that. Like, it has to tie into the world that you're trying to move into. This is also true. I don't know how big the bias is in the supply chain world with the type of goods that you guys are working with, but this is definitely something that I see a lot in other industries, where if all you were doing was like fast mover consumer goods, your experience might not translate that well into like luxury goods. So you don't want to keep talking like fast.
Yeah.
Is that true in supply
Yeah, I
chain?
think you're right, because there are people who are specialists, and
Yeah.
obviously in the right job, in the right place, in the right company, then that is perfect. Let's say IT, for example. I'm an IT specialist in procurement, blah, 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 which is great. But if you're going to go into a company where that isn't a necessary skill requirement, no matter how long you've worked in procurement per se, then it won't translate. Whereas you worked in a range of businesses that have had different goods, services, obviously procuring from different countries, dealing with different cultures and such, then that could be far more appealing as a broad skill set. And it shows you're adaptable and flexible. You can learn new things quickly and so on and so forth. So I think, yeah, absolutely, that makes sense. So we're just looking at the time, keep an eye on things. I think I could talk to you forever here, but where's the best places? We talked about your website, but also where's the best places on social media that can people find more about you and your company?
Sure. So you can follow me on LinkedIn by going to linkedin.com/in/career-tuners, or you can find me on Instagram at career-tips-from-CT. CT, just the letters CT.
Brilliant, brilliant. So let's end on a high, shall we? It's great to hear a number of things that you're doing and you're changing people's lives. So some great achievements and breakthroughs occurring. So how would you like to share one or two, obviously without betraying any confidences, of where you've taken a person from where they currently are and you've transformed their life with your advice and support?
I do good work and I don't want to undersell myself, but at the end of the day, these are these are my star clients, and they are my star clients because they are very smart, they're very bright, they're very capable, and they are the ones that are going in and doing the job. I'm just telling the story of what they did, right? So I think my most successful clients are those that don't really have like limited mindset beliefs. Most of the people that I work with, when they are talking about the salary that they'd like to command, it's about 20%, 25% above what they're currently making. But one of our favorite clients, he wasn't my client, he was my colleague's clients. He was like, I would like to get paid double, and it takes a lot of guts to say something like that, because we feel, a lot of us, we conflate who we are with our salaries. And for us to say, no, I'm twice the man that my salary is, or I'm twice the woman that my salary is, or twice the person, that takes a lot of challenging of who you are. And those are my most successful clients, people who can think like that. So this gentleman, we redid his resume, and he was able to command double what he was originally making. And then he came back for an update 2 years later, and then he got it 15% above that. So really proud of him. It was all his work, and it was all his mindset, because I can write your resume, I can prep you for interviews, but if you're not going to be like, look, this is it, like this is the job that was meant for me, this, $300,000 per year salary, this is what I want. And if you don't believe that, then it's going to be very difficult to manifest. So that's one gentleman that I really loved working with. We're still in touch with him. He's advising us on a project, actually. Another person that I really liked working with was a gentleman who was able to achieve a $350,000 per year salary. Initially, he was being paid $250,000. So it's not quite double, but it's still a very fantastic increase. And he did that. And, he was just like a very active person. Like, he didn't really talk much. He's just like, okay, let me get my resume, let me send it out. He was very much a doer. And he was so accomplished in his space that I frankly feel like they got a deal. Like, he could have asked for more. So I think people who don't let their mindsets limit themselves and really act with what they're given are the most successful clients.
It's really interesting. It's not actually what's written down, it's the person themselves. And don't restrict yourself with your own limiting beliefs, basically. So, that's brilliant advice. Well, that's fantastic. Noticing the time is up. Thank you very much for sharing all those great tips and ideas, and your websites, and obviously the chat GPT stuff as well. It's been a superb interview. And I'd like to thank you once again for your time today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Ed. Bye.
Bye.
So there's another Real Life Buyer podcast. I do hope you enjoyed it, and it's given you some ideas and inspiration for greater action and achievement. If you are a purchasing or a supply chain professional, business owner or director, come and join my Facebook group, the Purchasing and Supply Chain Community Hub, a safe place to engage with like-minded, friendly people. See you soon. Bye.